for afternoon tea. And I just vividly remember, Anthony, we have conference down in Wellington. A few months later, Redeemer Tauranga. It's just like it just genuinely got birthed out of a conference smaller than this. Like it was just a small little conference, and then bang, we had a church. It was just kind of like, yeah, time to do it. So what we're going to do for this one, we want to talk about barriers to planting, mission opportunities in New Zealand, becoming ascending and church planting church, and I've given Mike the freedom to hijack this panel if he wants. What I do want to do is just read from Acts 4:10, 21 to 23. This is with the Apostle Paul. When they had preached the gospel to that city and had made many disciples, they returned to Lystra and to Iconium and to Antioch, strengthening the souls of the disciples, encouraging them to continue in the faith, and saying that through many tribulations we must enter the kingdom of God. And when they had appointed elders for them in every church with prayer and fasting, they committed them to the Lord in whom they had believed. And so Acts 4:10 gives us something of a condensed version of the Apostle Paul's church planting strategy in the book of Acts, and all those churches in Galatia and so on. And it's take the apostolic doctrine, preach the apostolic doctrine, pass that to the church, it's the apostolic doctrine of Christ, appoint elders in the local churches, and then entrust that church to the Lord, entrust the church to the Holy Spirit, and that's it. That's the strategy. A deposit of truth, the leaders to shepherd and protect, and entrusting the church to the Lord. And that's it. So, let's start with something nice. Why church planting? Aren't there enough churches in New Zealand? There's lots of them. What do you guys reckon? Let's go. Goodness, man, come on.
Aren't you the director guy?
As the regional director of X29 New Zealand.
Are there too many churches?
No way. Like, you could take it from a pragmatic point of view anyway. It's just kind of looking at like Callus stuff and what they're doing with city to city, and they can give you the info around, hey, you've got X amount of churches to a population of 1,000. This is the sort of witness, impact, influence that a Christian worldview will have on that society. So you've got the pragmatic side of things. You've also got some of the stuff as it relates relationally to people, and the fact that churches historically, especially in Aotearoa, have played a pivotal role in the normal everyday life of communities. We're going to come back biblically speaking though, and looking at the theology of the local church and how that actually works day to day in everyday life. And when you think about the number of churches that we have that have good gospel-centered doctrine, that are committed to seeing more disciples being made, you can have a look in your own town. You can kind of drive around a square here, right, and see old church buildings, and you can look around this entire city and see, hey, that used to be a place of Christian witness, and now it's a coffee shop or a pottery place or whatever. As we think about the decline in the number of people who identify as Christians as well, surely we can see that there is a desperate need for more Christian witness. What I have found to be our experience at Redeemer is that local churches that are planted create a context and a setting for more leaders to be raised up, more opportunity for witness and ministry, so that if we can get more Christians doing Ephesians 4, for example, being able to use their gifts for works of service, so that everybody will be built up, so we're not getting tossed to and fro about bad teaching, but then also that we can be out evangelizing. Churches, new churches, church plants do that so much better. There's just more opportunity. So you can get some stats stuff, you can look at some sociological stuff, but biblically, we see that. Acts is a classic example as well. So, yeah, feel free to add.
Just quickly, while you think, give you some more thinking time. But why are you looking at me like that?
Just don't know what's going to come out of your mouth, brother.
No, this is a serious point. I remember that on just on what Anthony was saying, I remember one of the things was that we, I came from a 2,000 people church in South Africa, so just got used to all of that. But it was on the leadership team, so it's leadership meeting after meeting after meeting after meeting, how it just goes every day, all day, just these meetings with subgroups and this and that. And it was crazy, like pastorally, all these questions that bubble to the surface as these, these themes that you just can't figure it out. You got 2,000 people, and you're trying to figure out, how do we make this guy like the other guy? How do we get them to hang out? What sort of system do we need? What sort of new computer thing do we need to get people to start taking care of other people? And just all these things, right? And then we planted, and I remember with 10 people, 15 people, 20 people, it just starts growing. And it was like all these problems just dissipated, and we were solving all the problems. I remember such a distinct feeling there. Like, if someone didn't come to church that day, you just like see the chair empty. And then someone phones him. You didn't even have to tell anyone to do that. They were like desperately concerned. Why the heck weren't you at church today, bro? And they phone him up, and it's like, you know what gold that is. There is no system that can do that. So the more of that, that's how you solve the pastoral problems. You just plant churches. And I'm not saying the big churches, don't have their place and whatnot. Obviously, to the degree that they can organize those things, fine. But it's a very organic and natural way to do everything you've just been talking about. I remember feeling that.
Yeah, amen. Something that I found really helpful was a pastor up in Auckland said to me, Jono, take every church in town. There's going to be some like heretical ones in there, but like take every single church in town and then ask what capacity those churches need to have on a Sunday in order for 10% of the city's population to be in church that Sunday. Work that out. And it's like it works out like every church needs to have 800 people or something like that. And it's just like, well, that's not going to work. You know what I mean? Like just think that through. It's like the average would be bigger than the biggest church in the town. You know what I mean? And that's 10%. And so it really kind of solidified some things in my head. So, all right. So here's the bad news, right? So, Acts 29 churches are committed to church planting, and we're supposed to be called to be church planting churches, and by nature that's sending and encouraging it and sending money and all sorts of things like that, right? But none of us have yet planted a daughter church in New Zealand. What sort of barriers have we seen? Mike's got an easy barrier. Every time he gets a church planter, they get taken by another church.
That's the barrier, leadership. Like, just we need more guys to be willing to go. That is literally the only thing. The more people are willing to do it, the more people are willing to commit themselves to that process, whatever that might mean. Half the problem is you don't really know what that might mean. It could mean a bivocational thing. It could mean living sort of, just in pastoral ministry generally, you've got the money issue that you've got to kind of conquer in your mind and just go, right, this is not going to be the most lucrative life and career. But, you get past that and make the decision, I want to be into it. And then once you've determined to minister, you still might have to get a job somewhere else, and you're still not making ends meet, and, to plant this church. And it's a big ask. And it's, people you can't force anyone to do that. And so to the degree that you have more people to work with ready to go, you can plant churches, in my view. That's the fundamental issue.
Yeah, and I think when you're talking just wanting leaders, it's not just anyone. Want qualified leaders. And I think if you even look at your own self when you planted, and if you're now looking at yourself, would you say I'd send him? And I'd look at me and I'd go, I don't know, actually. No, it's a fact. I really am not sure if I was qualified, actually, in many ways. And I think, you can be overly cautious and not, let's give a guy a go, but you don't want to be frivolous because you're dealing with people's lives and you could wreck people's lives. And I think there's nuance needed in there, which I think is why Acts 29 is of such good value, because not only is it a network of brothers and joined hearts and churches, but it's also has tools and the ability to help us who are under-resourced and under time-resourced to vet people and say, hey, look, this guy's got some issues. We need to work on those. Doesn't mean it's a no, but we can work through some stuff. And so I think there's a lot of hope with Acts 29 because at least there's a process that we can work with and work together for. But I do agree. Let's get some guys up and going. The other barrier, I think, is also how do we work together? Because, we're all joking about the charismatic thing, but everyone has their own things. Would I have a church that's like this? Would I have a church that's like that? Do I want to be so tight? Do I want to be so loose? And what does a new church look like? And then how do we then join put our cash together to get something up and running? These are all questions that we're all thinking about and need to work through as we move forward. They're difficult things, but not insurmountable.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think within Acts 29, you've got the ability to see the degree of unity whilst at the same time having the discretion and the autonomy and the individuality within the churches. One of the things that I've had an opportunity to do is just look at some Christian traditions and their church planting endeavours since the early 1900s coming up to now. And there was, you take Brethren churches, for example, planting 150 churches within 50 years. That's pretty crazy numbers right up and down the country. If you look at the charismatic renewals that were coming out of the Methodist churches and the Anglican ones in the late 70s and early 80s, again, you just see like a bunch of denominations formed out of that and churches planted. One of the things, like looking into some of those stories, is that there was, like, this is a normal thing to do. Like, these churches that were getting planted thought it was normal to then go and plant another church. So not just leaders, and I completely agree with Mike around just the need for more leaders, but there was also just the auntie who was like, oh, we're going to go start a church. I'll cook the lunches. Like, they would just, there was a movement of people that would go and just do something that they saw that was really normal. And so I just don't know if we've still got that. There are some networks and denominations now in Aotearoa that will do plants and replants, and so you'll see them talk about the new campus or the new place, and they've got that, like, there's just a group of people, this is a normal thing that we do. So seeing that kind of press out more into our network as well, and our churches, this is a normal thing we do, we just go and plant churches. I think that's another thing too.
So there's something of a need to then recreate the normality of that, the culture of standing, the celebration of standing, and I think as well it's hard, Yep. I think something of a barrier that I've seen that might contribute to the attitude is every time you have, like, some church plants fail. We're going to talk about that. Like, church plants fail all the time. I mean, I was reading in I think it was Sydney, one neighbourhood in Sydney, 38 failed church plants in the course of 8 years. None succeeded and continued on. So 38 failed ones in a neighbourhood. And I think every time we flippantly plant churches, send unqualified men, or just like have no accountability, you know what I mean, where you just kind of, I think, and that doesn't go well, I think it makes us all hesitant to do it. I think we've become a very risk-averse society lately, right? We're very risk-averse these days, and this has got something that's got a possibility of failing. And I think that inertia as well doesn't really help. But I think sometimes when we do church planting goes badly, turns a congregation and the leadership off trying. I think it certainly does. So, I mean, I'm astounded at the number of churches. I mean, there's not actually that many, but the number of churches that planted or attempted to be planted in New Zealand that would fail any decent church planting assessment. Like, there's no way you'd get through because there'd be the glaring error, and then it's just like, yeah, we're just going to do it anyway, and of course it fails. So, can we talk about some failure?
I fail every day. We fail every day. Every day we failed. I'm just saying, it's kind of like one of the things that I see with those stats. In fact, I remember me and you having a talk about it a while ago, but there was you hear these stories. Hey, we gave it a go. We sent out a core team of like 50, and it's been like a whole month, and we're not yet at 1,000. We failed, you know. Everyone goes back, tail between their legs, and the guy ends up like totally not even in ministry afterwards, and you're like, dude, where do I start with that? You know what I mean? It's just like, my goodness, something wrong with that picture. And that's extreme, but there are a lot of sort of shades of gray there, and a lot of things in between with a similar theme that I would just want to push back on and go, you know, if that is failure, you know, then we're talking about something completely different. But the other kind of failure is also just, you know, it's okay. It's almost like, you know, let's put that in one category. There's another kind of thing that causes churches to quit, and that's because, let's say, something bad happened in the church, or someone did have a moral failure, or, you know, anything like that brings about discouragement. Again, I don't think that has to mean that the church fails. I think it probably doesn't hit a certain story's criteria and standards, but a lot of churches that end up doing really well started off rocky for, you know, many, many years. And that's okay. You just keep pressing on because that thing's in place. You've got the basic people that, you know, that they want to do it. They want to keep going, and they haven't had a pastor for a year. That's okay. We'll just keep meeting until we eventually find a pastor, and then a pastor does come along, and then the church turns around after like 50 years, you know, and then it's a really fruitful witness in the community. That's fine. That's not a failure. That's just a journey. So, and then there's the kind of thing I was joking about earlier, in that, you know, there's the kind of thing that I think, because you have some sort of story going on, or some set criteria, or this is what it looks like for a church plant to succeed, and then, you know, even if it's not something dramatic that happens, even if that church just doesn't ever hit that standard, it becomes a point that drags them down, and they eventually give up, and that shouldn't be the case at all. You know, in that case, we failed every day. You know, and I would think it'd be a problem if we just quit for that reason. So just some thoughts there.
Yeah, a big part around expectation of the planter and the sending church, and even the core team that's involved. If your expectation is to line up with this particular narrative around church plant and church success, then your failure isn't measured against necessarily gospel fruit. Your failure is against a story that probably people didn't even know was the story for your church. So, so failure-wise, I think our biggest, for me anyway, and I've been involved in these when Mike hosted the first one back in 2013. I've said the same thing every year. Just like, do something, like try something. What's the worst that could happen? The church that didn't exist before didn't get planted. That's okay. It's not a big deal. But what if something what if it did work though? What if hope beyond hope ended up happening, and then your church was planted and it thrived and it was intergenerational and it lasted well beyond your days? Like, what if that happens? You wouldn't know until we give it a nudge anyway.
So is that like a Braveheart church planting thing? Like, not all men die, not all men will truly live, yeah? No,
Conrad and Mbewe, you know, in Africa, the Spurgeon of Africa. Mbewe. He, you want to say it one more time? Because that's
Mbewe.
One more time.
Zambia.
All right.
Sorry, we brought Conrad over to New Zealand back in 2010 or whatever, and it was just, he's just like, gets up into the pulpit at Howard Baptist Church, and he's like, everybody, please turn with me to Romans chapter 1. And I was like,
See, now in
I don't know if
Africa,
that's the Holy Spirit or what, but it was just like, it was incredibly edifying. Anyone was there? Amen. We were there.
dude, in Africa, that's all he has to do, and then a church officially gets planted with that. He moves on to the next thing. But I get to have a good friend of mine at GraceNet that was a good friend of, he was from Zambia, and so we had lunch with him after he was down for one of these trips. And so, you know, at that point, I'm like, okay, what do you think? What do you think about New Zealand, and how do we get things going? Because he's got some insane number of churches that have been planted there. And I'll never forget. I'll do the accent as well. Here we go. He goes, brother, you must learn to err on the side of recklessness. And I'm like, oh, that's it. The whole time we're playing it too safe. Thank you, Conrad, and that's all I needed. No, but it was just the way he said that. I mean, it's almost like it would get you immediately booted from anything of the discussion today. And it just made me realize, he's had this major success, but he knows the failure, he knows the tragedy, and he's used the word recklessness to talk about that. Now, obviously, he's not saying anything against you were saying there in terms of needing to be qualified and doing due diligence in the process of raising up leaders and so forth. But I think sometimes maybe just need a little boot kick, and maybe it fails, and that's okay.
Do you think also that we do lack a little bit of that pioneer spirit in New Zealand that we once had? Well, I suppose you're not a long-term
it has
person
been like 15 years
15,
now.
Yeah, it doesn't count. But
I am like a citizen.
Yeah, citizen, yeah.
So
Yeah, okay. We'll let you come in then. But I suppose what I'm getting at is, this pioneer spirit where the whole let's give it a go type of thing. If you think of like Alexander the Great conquered the known world before he's 25, what young guys out there on fire for the gospel going, I just want to be involved in something, and they're held back by over conservatism. I sort of agree with what you're saying, but I suppose how do you recognise these guys and why aren't they there? They must be there somewhere.
Well, and the thing is, they're often there, but they're full of like thorns and thistles and really difficult people to be around, and they're not these obvious like, oh brother, how art thou? It's a matter of being offended in their presence for about like 5 minutes just to have a conversation, and the thing is, with those guys, it reminds me of John Wesley. And the whole thing there, where he basically took the motley crew. He was just like, oh, yeah, the Anglicans don't want him, I'll take him. And he basically said, I don't care who they are. I don't care if they've come from jail. I don't care, what they look like, what they sound like. Let them, I can't remember the exact words, I'm going to butcher it, but something like fear sin and be terrified of judgment and, all that kind of cool Wesleyan stuff. And love nothing but the righteousness of the kingdom. And such men alone will shake the gates of hell and move the kingdom forward, And that's what he did. I mean, he basically just said, all right, there's a horse, there's a Bible. Off you go. And I'll make sure to write to you. And, there are a lot of tragedies, but my goodness, I mean, who could deny the value of what took place there? So, I mean, you could go half as reckless as that and still end up with something really good. But, that didn't happen just by accident. There was a willingness to work with people that otherwise just get thrown away because they don't meet some sort of standard. Seminaries, I think, are unhelpful in that regard, tremendously unhelpful.
That's cool. Why don't we let's jump onto the side of that.
Yeah.
Theological education.
Yeah.
Let's just do a little bit on that. Like there's perhaps a little bit of a crisis of biblical and theological literacy these days. What do we do about that as far as church leadership, pastors, planters, and then the local church? Like, what do you say? Open-handed.
Got a few thoughts, but go for it.
We are the most qualified one up here, Michael, so Dr. Beck, you want to start us off?
Well, I've been very frustrated with seminaries and the whole process, and it sort of usurps the place of the local church at many levels, I think, and it's created a bit of a monster, and there's all of that, and I can rant on about that, and that's a whole other thing. But then there's another sense where the light dawned one day, where I realized, wait a minute, if the problem is leadership, and we need to get as many, and I'm trying to plant churches, if that is the goal, and I need leaders, seminaries. Imagine that. It's like, boom. And then I was like, okay, well, I mean, all right. So now you're not necessarily buying into the seminary system, but what I want to do is get the people that are going to the seminaries, because that's where, if you are feeling like just maybe you've come from a church tradition that really hasn't emphasized church planting, and you're just you're just sort of vaguely even a Christian, and you meet so many people like this, and then they sort of get out of school, and and they're like, well, I feel like I might maybe think about ministry or something, or I just want to know more about the Bible, and they go to seminaries. That's just aren't necessarily in a local church that will know what to do with that guy and how to bring him along, or that local church doesn't have a structure to kind of pull people out of the woodwork. So everyone else is just going to go to seminary. And whether they should be there or not, it's a great place to actually, gather men that want to plant churches. So that's what's made me go tour in that direction. Next year, I'll say a little bit more about this later, but
So why are you going to Presbyterian college?
because I want to get the Presbyterians and make them Baptists. Jeez, now you made me say it. Are we live streaming that? I mean, I didn't mean like Baptist. I just mean stop sprinkling babies. That's all I mean. No, the whole thing with the Presbyterian with nothing. Did I say Presbyterian again? Woo! It's getting hot in here. The whole thing with a Bible college is that you basically have guys that are going, hey, I'm doing a 1-year course, and let's see where this goes. So I'm like, I want to be right there. I want to be not only teaching them what I think is good, and certainly funneling them towards good systematic and biblical theology, but I want to just spot them and say, hey, if you are thinking about something, there is a next step. There is something that you can do. There is some way you can go, and we'll see how it goes. I mean, next year will be the first time that I actually try that, consciously. We've raised up a few people and have had a process in the local church for a while, and as a Reformed Baptist denomination or fellowship, we've had a system that's been working something through for a while now. But this will be my first attempt to actually go to the seminary. It's like, reminds me of that Jim Morrison quote, build the stage and the people will come. I'm just going to go to the seminary and the people will come. That's my idea.
That's your plan.
That's my plan. Had to get a PhD for that, but anyway. Bit of
Money
that
well
obstacles
spent.
out of the way. Yeah. But yeah, so we'll see. But I think that is going to be important, and hopefully sort of that together with you're sort of ticking the training box there. You're gathering people beyond the local church. You're sort of giving them something to shoot for. You can call people to that calling from not just the pulpit but there, and then you can sort of, as a local church, I feel like I'm in a position that I can supplement and correct some of what would normally happen at that point, because people might typically they go through that 1-year diploma or whatever it is, and then they're like, oh, great, I'm going to go to the States and get more degrees, and and then sooner than later they got so much debt that their only thing profitable for them or commercially viable for them is at that point to just become a lecturer or go into academia or something like that. And so any church planting, even pastoring, becomes impossible because they got so much debt. So you can give them a whole new dream at that point, and hopefully help them to not give up the goal of theological education, and yet just have that happen in light of this idea of planting churches in New Zealand.
Absolutely.
I think when it comes to theological education, like the formalized track, how many people have got a bachelor's in theology or a master's in divinity or theology that actually don't believe the stuff that they studied anymore? Like they've gone through Evangelical College 101, and then they've gone across and they realize, oh, we've got some people looking around going, is he talking to me? But that's probably one of the things that gets me is like, if we whittled it down, and we've talked about this at Redeemer, whittled it down to what are the basics that we want people to come away with from Bible college or seminary study, it has to do with biblical theology, systematic theology, understanding how languages work, and then getting about like how do you care for people who are difficult and got issues. So that's one thing. Like, doesn't seem to be the most sustained qualification that you'd go in to learn that, and then you come out and you actually know, I don't believe a lot of that stuff anymore. And then the other thing too is just that, and Mike raised it here, the debt level. So we get people who go off, and if they can't get a scholarship, if they can't get study allowance, if they can't get this and the other thing, they're going to be burdened with a debt, a student loan that they've got to pay back at some point. And you're going to do church planning unless you got like daddy money bag sitting in the background with a whole bunch of coin to just kind of make it rain. You're not going to be able to pay back your stuff, so you're going to go back and work a job somewhere else. So we could, get that bit, because you definitely need to be competent in discerning how theology and rightly dividing the word. That's vital. But yeah, I like what the Fellowship of Reformed Baptist Churches did with the Roving College, and here's a consistent criteria. Here's a consistent curriculum. Look for these evidence markers. That most of it gets achieved in a local church context. That's gone. Don't know why you're abandoning them for the Presbyterians, but that's okay.
No, not doing that. But you know that also gets me thinking. Although actually, let me hand it over because we'll probably come back to this at another point. Go for it. Yeah. See how I just did that?
Okay. There will be opportunity tomorrow to ask just questions and then Anthony and Sean will take some bivocational questions and stuff as well. All right. Well, actually, the theological question, what about at the local church level, at the lay level? Like, okay, so what Mike does is he preaches for 58 minutes and then uses double-barrel hyphenated Kleinian words that people don't understand, and that's go read the book. That's your plan, right?
Close. Yeah. Well, you know, just actually, this will dovetail nicely on what I was going to say there. Just before I forget this, the big thing with the edge that we have on the whole, you know, you think about this broad evangelical thing, and you're sort of going to go study theology, whatever that even means, and then probably the most valuable thing you can do during that time is get the languages under the belt, because you know you'll kind of need those one way or another wherever you end up. But everything else is like, you know, it's so open and so broad and so on the table. So it is literally impossible to come out competent because you haven't even got something that you've aimed to be competent in. Whereas you got a confessional basis of some sort, you know, where you have some sort of historically reformed, this is what it means, this is what you have to be competent in. That allows you to really, not only from a college or seminary perspective, just sharpen things and help to really make that time go well. That people are investing in something, and they're not coming out just with the broadest possible scope of anything imaginable, but they're coming out well trained in a specific tradition. Even if they end up not going along with that tradition, you know, so you mentioned the Presbyterian thing. Even if they end up like Anglicans or Baptists or whatever, it's still more valuable, I think, to stick to a certain tradition and figure that tradition out properly. And in the process, you'll actually be more trained than if you just go and try and do this denominational thing. But then bringing that works down to the local church level as well, to answer that question, because at the local church level, if you've got a confession in place, it really helps you. It assists in the erring of on the side of recklessness, because you don't have to like vet someone from absolutely no, you know, I mean, you don't know where they are, what they hold to. So I really like it. Once someone becomes a member at GraceNet to begin with, it's almost like they're at the level of having done a theology diploma anyway, you know, because there they are. They've covered this very, very robust confession. We've gone through it with them. Usually they spend a long time working through the sharp edges of that. So by the time they become a member, you know, they kind of know their stuff, you know, and then you're thinking, okay, now this person is thinking, you know, it's like you don't have to really send them to seminary because they've already got their system and they've already confessed to believe it. It's just a matter of getting them competent to minister that understanding of the Bible.
So much of knowledge just seems to be to have the tools to be able to work out the answers.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, and that's how I survive in ministry, honestly.
Yeah.
I know where to find the answers. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
I think once you got that,
Yeah.
that's helpful.
Starting point, yeah.
And just to teach people some of that.
Yeah.
All right. Opportunities for the gospel and church planning in New Zealand. What do we see? Like, what do we kind of, you know, we've got all sorts of cultural moments going on. There's always need. What do we kind of see?
With things like government legislation and policy coming through that will require organizations to adjust the way that they gather, that they work, that they interact. Like, surely this is an opportunity now for some churches who have congregations over 100 to start thinking about, hey, how can we do things differently? And in God's providence, you might hate the policy and think it's dumb, but look at the affordance and the opportunity now where it's going to be normal for gatherings to be under 100. Like, trying to think through, like, if we go back to that success narrative of what a local church is supposed to look like, in my head, Redeemer was supposed to be 4 times the size it is by now, and we should have planted 2 other churches. And now, in my thinking through what the narrative is, like the government's saying it's got to look like this, and we might as well plant another church sooner rather than later if we've got to meet those gathering limits. So I think that's one of them, because who knows how long the framework will stay in place for, and even if it's only around for 6 months.
Indefinitely.
Well, even if it's around for 6 months, like for 6 months you had a nudge at planning another
4
church.
years. I'm not even kidding.
You don't know. So just to get on with doing something, like how many churches will be trying to figure out their multiple service approach? Like, because we're thinking about that at Redeemer, multiple service approach. Well, man, we could just plant another church. Like, I think that's an exciting opportunity.
I do definitely think there's so we said we weren't going to talk much about COVID gathering limits. I'm really sorry, but I'm not actually. We're just kind of but what we've been thinking through is, you got your church and you got like some people pushing you for civil disobedience like 6 months ago already, and then you got people wanting it to be very, very strict, and then some people saying I'm not showing up unless you got a third of the gathering limit or whatever, and you've got all of that in your spectrum. 2022 is going to be a good year to have a small church. And that's an opportunity in my head. 2022 is a good year to have an uncomfortably small number of people. And
to beat the same drum, it's a real call to anyone who was going to step up for the task of, trying to even sniff in that direction. Perhaps now would be the time to really think about it and help, because again, you're stuck. You're down to a split service or a campus model if you don't have people that are going to help out with that church plan or lead it or give it a go. So, yeah.
What about cultural moments in New Zealand, like just the way this country's going? There's just feels like things are changing quite fast. You know what I mean, as far as people's attitudes and stuff. I mean, I think constantly we've got this less and less Bible knowledge, less and less feel. Research is showing that Gen Z is far more open to spirituality than previous generation. Like there's an openness to God and some sort of spirituality. I'm not saying you're going to land in orthodoxy right off the bat, but what do you think about that?
Research showed that about every generation prior. I just feel like that's a well-worn.
It's the same guy saying the same thing.
I'm not going to fall for that one again. I'm not doing it.
Look, I think you just look in the book of Acts. Persecution hit the early church. They spread out. And when they went, they took the gospel with them. And I think it's just been adaptable to the moment. We don't know what's tomorrow going to bring. We don't even know what your life is going to be one moment from now. You go walk out the door and get hit by some crazy driver, like my dad, and
you're right, Rex, mate. You're right.
You just don't. You don't know, right? And so I think you've got to be adaptable. We've got to realise that our future is in the hands of Christ. He's already determined our last steps. Well, what are we going to do while we wait for that time? We're just going to sit around and watch everyone else do stuff? I think we need to just take hold of the moment and actually start encouraging people to actually, I was going to say something I won't, but do something. Let's do something and let's encourage them. No, not speaking in tongues.
But you better start like right now if you're going to do the Acts 29 assessment process, because that'll be like 4 years on its own.
But I think that's the point. I'm going somewhere. I've got to turn my mind around, otherwise I'm going to get in trouble here. The point is that any cultural moment is the moment. It's the same as today is the day for salvation, in the sense of, right now is good. When is not good to plant a church? Well, I don't know. You look in the book of Acts, there was no barriers and there was no stop us. Oh no, the government are against us. Well, who cares? They're always against us. Why are you waiting for them to give you a green light? Well, it's never going to happen. What is God actually saying? He goes, the gates of hell will not prevail. So that's a green light, right? Let's just get on with it and put some of our differences aside and just say, hey, let's go for the kingdom. And I think this is why Acts 29 is great. you can joke about charismatics and non-charismatics.
I'm not joking.
And you can pretend to joke then, and we could take you out the back and sort it out later. But
I've already been healed today.
yeah. Well, that's right. But the point is, you can put those things aside in the sense for actually we can actually do something, and there is opportunity, and let's just stop spending years talking about something, waiting for this perfect time. It's never going to be perfect. And again, pastoral ministry is not about perfect, actually, because we're all broken. We've all got baggage, and there's always going to be something that's going to go wrong. And we've got to adapt, we've got to trust Christ, we've got to rely on the power of the Holy Spirit. And again, going back to expectations, if your expectation is do X, then, do Y, then, X, Y, Z always happens, well, that's not even anything. That's not you can't have those sorts of expectations. You just got to do what's in front of you. This is what is in your hand. We've always, as a church, from the very beginning, had this concept, which isn't actually Christian, but old Mother Hubbard opened her cupboard, and what did she have? Yeah, Nicola's going, cut. But this is the thing. What has God given you? You open the cupboard, which is your church, and we've got, I thought we would have this by now, but this is what we've got. Well, okay, this is what the Lord's given you. How are you going to do this? And so you've got to use what God's given you and actually, let's get to work doing it. Do the stuff, as someone said once. When do we get to do the stuff? Well, right now is the time. So there's my point.
Come on. Preach. You want the slap and kiss?
You can try.
So it's like real estate there, huh? Time in the market, not timing the market. Amen. I think there's real opportunity for collaboration as well. I hope one thing that this pandemic maybe shows us, and this is bound with idealism on my part, but that you kind of have to, above everything, find that which transcends, which is Christ and His gospel and His kingdom. You've just got to, and so there's a real opportunity if we set our hearts upon that to be able to collaborate for the furtherance of the gospel. I think as well. I think Mark Glenn is not here. This conference would have had a different feel with him here, but I think on the rural front, I do think there's, as far as opportunity goes, if you talk to people about planting churches, they're just like, and I think in New Zealand, and you ask denominational sort of what your plans are, it's like, we're going to find all the strategic centers, we're going to find all the university towns, we're going to plant churches there, every major city gets it, and it's just like, well, what about the rest of New Zealand, all the small places? And the assumption, I think, is that the people in the rural places will just drive in, sometimes. But the gospel does not flow downstream from the city. It just doesn't. The city is kind of just there. And so I think there's a real need right now in New Zealand for to be able to take the gospel to the smaller places. I think that's something that's really captured my heart, over the last few years, just looking around. It's like, you drive through a town, 2,000 people. There's one church. And it's like, those kind of things really concern me. And then you just see the cults everywhere. There's actually one on the way to Taranaki. There's one town that I went through. I was like, goodness gracious me. Jehovah's Witness, Mormon. I'm just like, does anyone actually like the true biblical Jesus here? It was just, and so, anyway.
Was there a question in that? Or were you just
The question is just opportunity, my man.
Slap and kiss?
Opportunity. Whatever, man. Who would win in a fight out of all of us? Oh, that's right, me. It's not a Bible fight, Mike. Do you guys just want us to just roast each other for the last 10 minutes?
Can I just add to that, though? It doesn't have to be a church plant. You can have gospel work in small places. Like, just find a guy that's a Christian and he can start a gospel work that maybe never leads to a church, but at least it leads to something, you know. And there's, you know, Taranaki is a big example. There's dozens of little towns, and some, or many, with hundreds only, or even less. And so, is there a Christian in that town? You know, how can we, even as a network, encourage some guy that we've met out in the boondocks and say, hey, you know, why don't you go and knock on your neighbour's door and say, hey, do you want to meet and read the Bible together? And you know, you can encourage lots of different things. And I think there's opportunities if you're a person here that's come from a small town. Well, you don't have to wait for some official person to come and knight you as, oh, you are now a church planter. No, just go and talk to someone and start a conversation. And there are opportunities. I think lots of little towns, there's Christians in there somewhere. Farmers, lots of farmers are Christians. You'd be surprised how many farmers are Christians. Even going back 20 years ago when I first started getting opportunities to preach, there's a little wee town, Moku, that's tiny. And we'd go to this little place, and you know, the person that wanted to stand up and fight you from the congregation was a farmer that had been reading his Bible. It might be some weird thing he'd been reading, but at least it was something, you know. And farmers are quite educated, actually. You'd be surprised. And I just think there's lots of opportunities. It doesn't have to be a church. It can be a gospel work. That's 2 or 3 guys, you know, family.
Small little home groups and see what happens, you know.
Yeah.
Amen. Much church planting I kind of wanted to do this, especially with Mike here. Much church planting literature and articles speak of the danger of planting a church service instead of a church. Let's talk about that. Is that a real danger? Like, what's going on there?
Yeah, well, I mean, I suppose there is you could have something in place where you've set it up. Maybe, you know, you want to look and feel like this glitzy performance thing, and the pastor has never met anyone, and it's almost like this hey, come and see, and then off you go, and there's no real anything else other than the music and the preacher, and you know, there's no membership, there's no sacrament, there's no eldership, there's no anything like that, or even if it's there, it's not being used properly, or and then obviously there is a problem. I mean, that's not what a church is. But I think the counter rhetoric there is almost just as dangerous, in that it goes against the Sunday. You know, it starts to talk about the church as more than just the Sunday, and that's the kind of mantra that comes forward from that. And you know, again, there's truth there in that obviously the church is more than just the Sunday. But I would say it's very, very important to keep the Sunday, and I think we're all aligned on this. I mean, to keep the Sunday as centered as possible. This is the thing we're mandated to do. This is the thing that, this is how primarily you disciple people, through the preaching of the word and the administration of the sacraments, and through your membership process. This is what is ultimately mandated. Your home group isn't mandated. You can't make anyone, according to any commandment, go to your home group on Thursday, you know, Friday or whatever it is. That might be helpful, it might be great, it might be excellent. Do it if you can, but that's different from Sunday. Sunday is something we're called to do. It's something that comes out of the word. You're under an obligation before God to be there, and there must be preaching, and it must be, you know, the dominant feature in the service. And so I would fight tooth and nail for all of those things. I often use the term. So, you know, we have one of the things I try and do when people come into the membership and they want to go through the process, I try and just, you know, show all the scary bits of the church and just use words that are perhaps not normally helpful, but just to provoke a little bit of a response, just to really get them thinking about things, just so they don't, you know, blindly move their way into membership and then they're not happy with it. So I usually tell them, I'm a cessationist. You like that one? I'm Baptist, I'm covenantal, not dispensationalist, you know, and I don't believe in infant baptism and so forth. And we keep rolling like that. And, this is the glory of the local church in that you can have these specific views and yet still be in complete unity with other local churches that don't have those specific views. But if you are coming into the local church where that's being ministered, they need to know that. And so one of the things that we say is like, listen, we're never going to ask you to, life is busy and you don't have to feel bad about not coming to the community group and whatnot. But if you are not there on Sunday, I'm coming for you. You're going to get a knock on the door. I'm going crazy on you. And, I just want to freak him out and get him good. And, how do we do pastoring? Via church ministry on a Sunday. That's how I talk to you. I don't even have normal conversations. Whenever you talk to me, I'm just preaching to you all the time. I'm just trying to freak him out, obviously. But the idea is just to really get them to think about this whole thing and see how important, actually, biblically speaking, the church service with its preaching is. So,
there's some hyperbole in what you're saying.
Like maybe a 1% or something. Yeah. Doesn't really qualify as hyperbole.
You talk to your people for at least an hour every Sunday, right?
Yeah.
Amen.
Well, I mean, yeah. So one of the things again to drive that home is, we don't have two services. We don't, we have one service. Not like I'm opposed to two services, but we got one. What I'm saying is we're renting the venue. We're kind of limited like that. We're coming together. We want to make this thing count. We want to leave filled, and so one of the ways we stamp that out is by just doing a decently long service, And it's part of the culture. It's part of this thing that we're putting forward. So, yeah.
3 minutes left. Anyone want to do one question from the floor? No, you're done. You want a donut? Any final words?
Close it up.
We're gonna pray tonight for the gospel church planning tonight. 6:15. Mike's gonna be preaching. That'll be great. So, thank you, gents. We've got half an hour now for afternoon tea. At 3:30, we're gonna do serving Christ with Christ in the local church with your hands full with Sean, and then Sean and Anthony are gonna do sort of talk about bivocationalism, and they will be taking questions from the floor as well, if you would like.
It's just not going to pray at all. We have to wait till tonight before we pray.